Dr. Rumeet Billan is an award-winning leadership and learning architect with a PhD in higher education. Her mission is to raise potential and transform workplace cultures by designing experiences that build resilience. I've personally attended her sessions and gained really valuable insight into coping strategies and building positive cultures. She bases much of her content on the groundbreaking research she's led, including the 2022 Workplace Belonging Survey and the Canadian Happiness at Work study in partnership with the Canadian Mental Health Association. As a result, she's been recognized as a top 10 powerful woman in Canada and featured in Forbes, NBC, and more. And you've likely seen her mental health commentary on CTV and Global News in the past year. In addition to her executive leadership programs, her humanitarian work contributes to social impact initiatives in education. She's here today to share her insights into the science of belonging. Welcome, Rumeet.
Thank you so very much, Teresa. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you are joining from, whether it's Arizona or British Columbia. It's great to see some familiar names in the participant list as well. I am so excited to be here. We only have 30 minutes together, and today we are going to be focusing on the science of belonging. So I am going to share my screen here, and it is going to be interactive. I want to hear from you. I want to learn from you. We're going to be connecting together. And the first thing that we are going to do, because we do have some time together, is get to know each other a little bit more. We're going to be doing a very quick Mentimeter. Now, if you do have a phone or a tablet, you can grab the QR code that you see on the screen. Now, if you don't want to use your phone or tablet, that's okay too. You can click on the link that's been posted into the chat box, and we are going to get over to our Menti. Just a couple of questions, a few questions to lay the groundwork and foundation for the content today. So 10 more seconds if you want to grab the QR code from the screen. If not, the link is there for you in the chat box. So let's move on over to our Menti. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Get on over there. All right, majority of you are there. Very good. My first question, and as a speaker, very, very, very critical and important for me to know. Friends, are you caffeinated? Majority, half of you are saying, yes, my 4 people who are not caffeinated, but need it ASAP, please go get it. You will just totally enjoy this session so much more if you need your caffeine and you don't have it. So please, my 8%, go get your caffeine. You know where it is. Majority of us are caffeinated. Very good for me to know. All right, let's dig a little bit deeper. Thank you for your engagement. I'm loving this. My next question. Are you experiencing burnout? Did you see how that all went to yes right away? Are you experiencing burnout? Now, we've heard a number of terms come out over the last 2 years, whether that's fatigue, pandemic fatigue, burnout, workplace burnout, languishing. I recently heard of resilience fatigue. And today, what we're going to do is we're going to be talking about the science of belonging, but you're going to see me connect this concept of burnout with belonging. So according to those who are participating, over half of us are experiencing burnout right now. We're going to build on this. So thank you. 18% of us are unsure and almost a quarter of us are not. So I appreciate you sharing. We're going to dig a little bit deeper onto the next question. Is self-confidence something you would like to develop further? And remember, completely anonymous. So we don't know who is saying what. The question is self-confidence something you would like to develop further? All right, you are quick. I'm loving this. So you're seeing majority of us, over 80%, are saying yes at the 80% mark. Now, this is fascinating, but not surprising. I've worked with thousands and thousands of leaders, does not matter the age, the gender they identify with, or their position title. The number one thing that people want to develop further is their self-confidence, the way we feel about ourselves. And this point is actually very important when we think about this concept of belonging. And here's what else that's fascinating about this. Majority of us, we're at 80%, say that we want to develop our self-confidence further. Well, it's also true that the majority of people you interact with on a day-to-day basis want to develop their self-confidence too. So when we look at the concept of creating moments and experiences and feelings of belonging, well, that's a really powerful insight. because we can also help others to develop their self-confidence. We're going to build on that. All right, next question. When I say the word belonging, what comes up for you? What are some words, phrases, sentences, thoughts? What does belonging mean to you? Now you can put in up to 5 responses and click submit. We're going to give a few seconds into this, and we are going to see what word cloud comes up. All right. Inclusion. Geography, very interesting. Community, safe, acceptance, team, validation, right? Understanding the why, accepting, accepted for. I've got happy, happiness, and no wrong answers here. No wrong answers. What does belonging mean to you? We've got fitting in, cooperative, cared for, engaged, feeling protected, together, respect. And you see that the words that are a little bit bigger in the word cloud, and many of you are saying those words, and that's why they're coming up bigger than the other words. But there is definitely a common theme here. Connection, trust, valued, love, family, happy, fitting in, beautiful. Another 10 seconds on this question, and we're going to move on to our last question. I love that a few of you are putting your answers into the chat box. Feel free to do that as well if you would like to. 5 more seconds. Feeling heard, welcomed, equal. And I'm seeing inclusiveness coming up in various different ways. Acknowledged, ownership, safe to ask questions, and to be able to ask them without fear of negative consequence, right? We refer to that as psychological safety. Beautiful, thank you. You see our word cloud, the words that we connect with this concept, this idea, this notion of belonging. Okay, on to the next, my last question, a little bit self-serving. The answers are leading, and that's okay. Are you excited for this session? I am very, very excited to be with all of you, and I know we only have a short time together, and there's a lot of content that I do want to pack in. And I will not be reading off of my slides, but I'm going to be including as much information as possible that I can on the slides for your benefit. Now, we are all excited for this session. I was waiting for that one person who has never been more excited. Thank you. I appreciate that so very much. Let's get into the content. I'm going to stop sharing my Mentimeter. We're going to go back into our PowerPoint. So appreciate you sharing your opinions, your thoughts. We're going to talk about belonging. And the first piece that I'd like to discuss is the science of belonging. Right? So our brains, we are hardwired and motivated towards belonging and connection, towards feeling connected, towards bonding, right? And the thing is, when we think about our social needs, things like cooperation, things like social bonding, connection, these social needs are actually managed by the same neural networks as our primary survival needs, things like food and water. What we also know is that social pain from being or feeling rejected, excluded, is akin to physical pain. So what do I mean by that? What I mean is the same neural pathways will light up. If you physically harm me, if you punch me in my arm, the same neural pathways will light up. If you resent me, ostracize me, exclude me. What we also know about belonging is that there's this powerful role of oxytocin, that feel-good hormone, right? And that's what helps us to feel social inclusion or bonded. It promotes connection, trust, empathy. And again, we're hardwired and we're motivated towards that. Now, in my research, when I was looking at how belonging is described and defined, this was one of my biggest aha moments. My biggest aha moments was simply this: a sense of belonging does not depend on participation with or proximity to others or groups. And that seems a little counterintuitive. What do you mean it doesn't have to do with other people belonging? Well, it does not depend on participation with or proximity to others or groups because it is defined as a unique and subjective experience. Belonging is an experience. And if you look at the true definition of social connectedness is the experience, the feelings, the moments of belonging. Well, let's build on this. Let me explain this a little bit deeper and a little bit further. Let's say, for example, you want to be inclusive. So you are going to invite everyone to the meeting. You're going to invite everyone to the decision-making process. Maybe you're inviting everyone to the party, to the event, right? I'm being inclusive. Everyone is invited. Okay. You can invite everyone, but that doesn't necessarily mean that there is a sense of belonging. And in fact, that can actually work against your inclusion efforts. Let me explain. You might say, but Rumeet, I invited everyone. I want to include all the voices. You can invite everyone to the proverbial table, but the question is, what happens when they get there? What is their experience? Are they silenced? Are they ignored? Are they accepted for their perspective, even if it differs from your own? Right? Are they included? Are they involved? So you can invite everyone to the table or to the meeting or to the event or host your town halls. You can do that, and that's okay. But what happens when they get there? And inclusion may fall short because it does not necessarily lead to that sense of belonging. The experience matters. Now, this quote comes from Arthur Chan, and Arthur Chan says, diversity is a fact, equity is a choice, inclusion is an action, and belonging is an outcome. Now, I would humbly edit that ever so slightly and say belonging is an experience that leads to an outcome. Because to have an outcome, there needs to be an underlying experience. Diversity fact, equity choice, inclusion action, belonging experience. Belonging is an experience. And you and I need to get very real when we talk about creating this sense of inclusion and belonging, because there's real inclusion and then there's surface inclusion. And when people experience surface inclusion, this actually reduces the sense of belonging and again, works against our inclusion efforts. So this is when employees are asked for their input because they believe they had to be asked. Or perhaps they represent a specific group. That's why they're being asked. That's surface inclusion. That idea of, well, I'm inviting everyone to the table. What happens when they get there? Now, real inclusion is when employees, they feel like they belong because they were included, they were involved, and they were accepted. And this doesn't mean you need to agree with everything someone says, but it's being able to share what it is that you're thinking, you're feeling, your ideas, your experiences without fear of negative consequence. There's a lot of value in positive friction. So we want to allow for positive friction, but that shouldn't come at the expense of me feeling as though I'm not accepted. So we need to get real with the differences between real inclusion and surface inclusion. I want to briefly talk to you about what organizations are sharing right now. And I'm going to share with you what came out of the 2020 Global Human Capital Trends Survey. You might say to me, but Rumeet, it's 2022, but walk with me for a second. 2020, our lives changed. We know that one of the top human capital issues was well-being. But what wasn't being spoken about in 2020 was belonging. Although the Human Capital Trends Survey of 2020 indicated that belonging and well-being were at the top. Now, here's what else is fascinating about this. At that time, 79% of organizations said that fostering a sense of belonging in the workforce was either important or very important, especially for their success over the last 12 to 18 months. Now, at that time, only 13% said that they were ready to address this trend. Well, why am I sharing that with you? Because if we go back to 2020, fast forward 12 months to 18 months, here we are. And what have we been speaking about? We've been speaking about the Great Resignation. We've been speaking about the Great Reshuffle, how people are leaving their jobs. And McKinsey came out with this in September 2021. It gained a lot of steam in November when we were talking about attrition, retention, resignation. And what they found was this, that the top 3 factors that employees cited for quitting was because they did not feel valued by their organization or their manager, or they did not feel a sense of belonging at work. So 2020, fast forward 12 to 18 months, people are leaving their jobs. These were the reasons that they were citing. Now, here's what's fascinating about that. When the employers, when the leaders were asked, why are your employees leaving? They cited inadequate compensation, they were looking for a better job, or poor health. No, they completely overlooked the relational elements because employees were saying, hold on a second, I'm not valued by my organization, or I'm not valued by my manager, or I don't have a sense of belonging here. And we can't overlook the relational elements. So as Teresa mentioned, I love research. I am a researcher. I conducted a study earlier this year in partnership with Ipsos called the 2022 Workplace Belonging Survey. And our survey focused on employed Americans. So this is data from the United States of America, employed Americans. And I wanted to ask them a number of questions, but I wanted to ask them, what does that even mean? What does a sense of belonging even mean? What does that look like? Right? We know that this is important, but what does that look like? What does it mean? The number one thing that came out of our survey results was being treated fairly and respectfully at work. Being treated fairly and respectfully at work. And leaders on the call, here's the thing, we can talk about fairness and respect. We can include it in our value statements. This is what we value, right? And that's easy to do. But my question then becomes, what are the actions, what are the behaviors that are associated with respect within your team, your department, your organization? Well, let me give you an example. Prior to pandemic, I was doing consulting for a group. We were hosting focus groups. I was with frontline staff, and we were talking about values. And of course, the word respect continued to come up. And then my response back was, okay, what are the actions and behaviors that are associated with that? What does that look like for you in your role on a day-to-day basis? And a gentleman raised his hand and said, when I say hello to management, they say hello back. And what we found was that was not happening. So again, when we think about fairness and respect, we can include it in our statements all we want, but what are the behaviors? What are the actions that are associated with it? Number 2, having your perspective or contributions valued by your colleagues or superiors or supervisors, right? Again, you're seeing this theme of being valued and feeling connected with others at work. Now, I wanted to put this in here because when I was designing the survey with Ipsos, I shared with them, I said, I really want to include this question. It's going to be the last question. It's going to be open-ended. You have to trust me on this. And I had pushback. And it was said, Rumeet, don't include this question. We know that you're not going to get responses to it. We would recommend don't include it. And I said, look, if we get no responses, that's okay. I take ownership of that. It's okay, but let me include this question. So we did. And the question was, the statement was, I wish my peers and colleagues knew, ... And we left it open-ended. We received over 2,096 responses to that question. I wish my peers and colleagues knew, and I will share with you, I could only read 500 at a time because it was heavy, and this was taking place January 2022. And I asked this question because I'm going to share with you just a few quotes that come from the survey. My anxiety can be crippling. The losses I suffered during the pandemic in my family, my career, my community. My daughter passed away. That I feel left out. that I feel like I'm failing a lot. I have a very difficult and stressful environment at home. That I am human too. Now remember, these are responses to an open-ended question that said, I wish my peers and colleagues knew. I wish they knew. And when we think about creating that sense of belonging, do we create that environment where people feel safe to share what they might be experiencing? And you might say, okay, but Rumeet, people should keep their personal lives at home. But here's the thing, we show up as our whole selves. We know of the number of heartbreaks and tragedies that have occurred around the world and in our own backyard in the past 2 years that have impacted how we show up every single day, that impact whether or not we feel burnt out, exhausted, tired, fatigued. And when we think about this concept of I wish my peers and colleagues knew, we have no idea what someone else might be going through or experiencing during this time. But what we can do is create moments of belonging so that they don't feel left out. Right? So let's explore a little bit further. We're going to go into the chat box. My question to you is this. We're done with the Menti. We're in the chat box. What do you think? Why might someone be reluctant towards public speaking? What might be some reasons? Why might someone be really reluctant towards this? What do you think? What do you think? Let's pop our answers into the chat box. I love this. I love the interactions that you're having. All right, we've got fear of failing, anxiety, crippling social anxiety, fear of ridicule, lack of confidence, fear of looking stupid, right? Fear of being judged, not being perfect, introvert, fear of failing, exposing vulnerability, lack of trust. I'm loving this. Keep it coming. Could be a speech impediment, afraid that their information they're passing along is not important, not knowing your content well enough, imposter syndrome. I love it. Thank you for your contributions. Let's dig into this because we're going to talk about exclusion. Before I get into how we can create moments of belonging, we need to talk about this because belonging and social rejection are at odds. And again, as I mentioned at the start of our session, we've come to understand that social pain caused by things like feeling ostracized or rejected can create a response in our neuroprocessing not so different than what's caused from physical pain. And as I was doing the research on rejection and exclusion, the term isolation kept coming up as well, and isolation as punishment. So think about it. We may have reference points, some of us from when we were younger, being put into timeouts, right? That denied social interaction for short periods. And so we actually might have reference points of isolation as being punishment. Now, I encourage you to consider, how do you think that's played out in the last 734 days since the World Health Organization declared what it is that we're experiencing as a pandemic, where people have felt isolated? And if we have that reference point that it is punishment, right? How has that contributed to rejection and exclusion? And also our neural processing and how we process that. If I were to ask you, when you see on your screen, which one doesn't belong, my assumption is you're going to choose the rectangle. Maybe not all of us, but some of us, or most of us, are going to be choosing the rectangle. Now, I share this with you because here's the thing. You and I have been asked this question since we were very young. Which one doesn't belong? We've been asked this question. We've been asked to categorize. We've been asked to not only categorize, but look for patterns, put things and then people into groups. And the thing is, it's a normal cognitive process to be able to find patterns, to group things together. It's important when we're looking at math. But the thing is, when we do so, we exaggerate the differences between groups and we exaggerate the similarities between the items in the same group. And we've been doing this since we were very young. Social preferences for members of one's own social group. All of this was in place in time before children entered formal schooling. We were asked, Which one doesn't belong? And the thing is, when we feel like we don't belong, when we have to show up as someone who is not ourselves, when we cannot be our authentic selves, well, what's happening is we're using our energy to be someone else. So of course we're burnt out. Of course we're underperforming, because it takes energy to be someone who we're not. And also we have one foot out the door. But again, when we think about which one doesn't belong, our own social preferences, right? We want to think of the consequences that creating groups, exaggerating similarities, exaggerating differences, what this can create in our departments, in our teams, in our organizations. Now, I know I only have a few minutes left with you, so of course I want to leave you with some tips, tools, strategies that come from the literature. But my first thing is to share that belonging is not a program. It is not a policy. It is not an initiative. Belonging is an experience. It's a collection of the experiences that we have. Now, there are a number of things that we can do in creating moments of belonging, and none of this is going to be new to you. But I'm going to point out a few. The first one being an ally. We've heard this word allyship and being an ally. But what the literature shows is when we are a fair-minded ally, which means we do not give others preferential treatment. We treat people fairly and respectfully. So you're seeing a theme come up again. That can actually buffer the exclusionary behavior of someone else. So if we're on a team, someone is engaging in exclusionary behavior towards me, but I see you as a fair-minded ally, that can actually buffer their behavior. And from my study that I did in 2022 with Ipsos, only 34% of respondents shared that they had an ally at work. When we're making introductions, it's about introducing the whole person rather than their roles and responsibilities. When we're asking questions, it's not just about asking questions, it's to ask and to listen to understand. We know about soliciting input in meetings, but again, I encourage you to think about what happens when they get there. Are they ignored? Are they silenced? Or are they listened to, heard, accepted? Paying attention, right? Not being on our devices, not being on our emails while we're speaking to someone else. And something that continued to come up in the research and literature was sharing stories. Sharing our own stories of experiencing exclusionary behavior, but also sharing stories and exchanging experiences of when we were able to help others or coached others. Because Paul Zak found that when we hear a story with a beginning, a middle, or an end, it causes our brains to produce cortisol and oxytocin, that feel-good hormone. And it triggers our human ability to connect, to empathize, to find meaning. And it's through our storytelling that we find our way to belong. And you might not like the term storytelling. You could throw it out the window. Experience exchange, crafting our narrative, because we create belonging moments by allowing vulnerability moments. And my last two slides, the foundation of belonging is that it starts with self. How am I showing up for others? How am I creating experiences of belonging? How have my past reference points created an idea of where I feel like I do not belong or where I do belong? We first have to go within when we think about belonging and how we show up, our actions, our behaviors, and the experiences that we want to curate, the moments, the feelings that we want to have. Because belonging is not an initiative, it's not a program, it's not a policy. It's an experience, and we all have the ability to create those. On that note, I am going to hand it back over to Teresa. Teresa, thank you so much for hosting. Thank you so much for allowing me to be with this fantastic group. Thank you to all of you for your engagement. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Teresa, back to you.
Thank you so much, Rumeet. Certainly, you've helped us appreciate the power of belonging and inclusion and respect. And I saw in the chat, you definitely generated some thinking around what does respect mean? Is it an expectation? And around confidence. So it's nice to see the engagement on a number of levels. And thank you for the comments coming in. Great content, great insights. So much appreciated. And we will provide a recording and a follow-up email to everyone who's RSVP'd here so that you can revisit some of the content, share with colleagues, and hopefully implement some changes, whether they be personally or professionally, to help foster more of a sense of belonging and inclusion in your personal and professional lives. I hope you'll join us for our next speaker. We'll be back in 2 weeks with growth mindset psychologist Marie-Hélène Pelletier. And we appreciate you being here today and throughout the year. We are here to help with great speakers, including Rumeet, for some of your programs to really help move forward your organization in 2022. Thanks again. Take care.
Beautiful. Bye, everyone. Take good care. Thanks, Teresa.
Thanks, Rumeet.